Good morning. We're middle of the Sikha, the essay from the Rebbe on the mitzvah of reclining. So, Baruch Hashem, our classmate's doing much better. He had a successful surgery on Thursday. I saw him yesterday, and he looks better. But nonetheless, we continue to daven for his complete and full recovery. Avram ben Devoida, a Kohen. Okay, so we've come to the point where the Rebbe concludes that there are two components to the mitzvah of reclining that are not mutually exclusive. They both coexist. Namely, it is an independent mitzvah that one must demonstrate their freedom by reclining. Now, it happens to be the primary time to express that reclining is when eating matzah and drinking wine. But in essence, the mitzvah is of a general nature, and therefore, it's the optimal way would be to recline even during the meal, even when you're eating anything else, because that's the mitzvah manamufchar. That's the praiseworthy best way to perform the mitzvah of expressing your freedom by reclining, of an independent mitzvah. And simultaneously, it's also a detail within the mitzvah of matzah and wine, at least a rabbinic detail, that in order to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah properly, one must recline. In order to fulfill the mitzvah of drinking wine properly, one must recline, which means if one were eating their matzah again because they didn't recline the first time, right? So now they're eating matzah for what purpose? The second time. A, to fulfill the mitzvah of reclining tonight, but also B, to make up for the fact that their first matzvah was incomplete. And therefore, even if they don't make hamoitzi, seemingly they would have to make a alachilas matzah. That's how it would seem. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so now, having concluded that both of these things are true, citing proofs for either direction, the Rebbe is now on page 18 in the bottom left, where it says, hey, the Rebbe is now going to go to the language of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, which we learned, and highlight different expressions, different phrasings in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, as well as the structure in which the halachas are laid out, and explain how these words express either one of the two approaches, which again are both correct. Based on the above, it can now be very well explained. The words of the Alter Rebbe B'Sifah Koydem in the previous paragraph. Quote, Sheyeshe B'Seba, right? It was, what was the light? What was it? Yeah, I have it here on the screen. It's halacha. Where is it? Good morning. Where is it?
Page 18.
I can't remember where it is. Hold on a second. Sorry, I'm trying to pull this up.
Page 18.
Yeah. Which is it? No, it's where the Alter Rebbe says that in every generation a person is supposed to show himself as if he left Egypt, and that's why you have to spend the night reclining. Oh, here. Halacha Zayin. Halacha Zayin, which I'm reading here in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, that a person is required to set his place. He's supposed to set his table beautifully, and he's supposed to set his place that he could lean like the kings, because in every single generation, a person is obligated to demonstrate himself as if he now left Egypt, and therefore, he should do everything in a manner of freedom, including reclining. Right? That's how the phrases it. Now you understand? Right. So what did Alter say? Back to the Rebbe's text there. A person is obligated to sit in reclining derech in a manner of freedom. Because in every single generation, is a person supposed to demonstrate himself as if he left Egypt. The Alter is paraphrasing the Rambam, and therefore, and therefore, one is required to do all his activities tonight in such a manner that it demonstrates freedom, including setting his table beautifully, including having up expensive china on the table, and including reclining. So the reclining is not a specific mitzvah or thou shalt recline at X point, but actually an independent mitzvah of any of the particulars of the night that expresses itself over the entire night. Demonstrate freedom. This is to say, this is a general obligation. To behave in a manner of freedom tonight. Move on. And based on this is understood that the obligation to recline, which extends from the general obligation to demonstrate your freedom, ain't a proper mitzvah achilas matzah. It's not a detail within the mitzvah of matzah. It's not. It's independent obligation expressed from your general obligation to demonstrate freedom. That would explain the language in that halach. But then, in page 19, top right, and afterwards, that was halacha number 7, halacha zayin. Right? What was the structure in Alter B'Shulchan Aruch? Remember, he began by saying that a person should set his table beautifully. That was halacha aleph. Right? And then he went on to discuss the laws of the mourner. And then in halacha 7, he said, because you're obligated to demonstrate your freedom tonight, yes, therefore you have to, sorry? Therefore you have to demonstrate, therefore you have to recline. Because everything you do is supposed to be expressive of your freedom. That was halacha 7. And then, after going on about who has to recline, who doesn't, then he gets on to, when should you recline?
What was the part about prepare a place at your table for reclining?
That was in halacha 7. Look at the Shulchan Aruch.
That's not what you were talking about right now.
So look at it here.
Number 7.
So again, don't read everything. We're just going to go through it quickly. Yes, halacha 1. Yeah, a person's table should be arranged while still at day. He's got to do it quickly so that the kids don't sleep. Right? Halacha beis. Okay, not to rush to the Seder because you have to do it on time. Right? Halacha 3 begins the story with the mourner. When to recline. Right? 4 again, mourner. 5 again, mourner. Right? And then 6. Make sure your table set beautifully with lots of beautiful dishes. Yeah, even borrow them. Then 7. Now, set a beautiful place to sit
for
reclining purposes. Why? Because this is where he says, this is what that we just quoted before. Because in every single generation, a person's obligated to demonstrate his freedom. Right? So here's where he describes set your place after describing set your place beautifully way earlier, or set your table, right? Goes on to mourner, then comes back to now your table should be opulent. And then flowing from that is make sure you have a place that you can recline because the entire night's supposed to be freedom. Right. So at this point, before you go forward, you understand that the mitzvah to recline is an outbirth of your night has to be set for freedom, including beautiful dishes and including reclining.
These are all
elements of exactly. They're all elements of a general obligation you have tonight to demonstrate freedom. That's indication that that's the mitzvah, right? But then
it's an independent.
Exactly, independent mitzvah born out of your obligation to demonstrate freedom. Now continue. Halacha 8. Even the person who's poor has to do that. Number 9, lean to your left, not to your back, not to your right. Number 10, who's obligated? A woman, not woman. 11, if you're in the presence of your father. 12, if you're in the presence of your teacher. And then 14, when should you recline? What do you mean, when should you recline? You just finished saying in halacha 7, recline the whole night. And then when he says when to recline, what does he say? He says to recline during matzah and the 4 cups of wine. Why? Because these things are a remembrance of freedom. To which the Rebbe asked at the beginning of the Sikha, What do you mean these things are remembrance for freedom? Who cares? The whole night's supposed to be freedom. You just finished saying in halacha 7. Follow?
This is where
Now we have the answer.
Transitions.
Oh, exactly. The other point. So in the beginning, he was telling you the general obligation to recline. And halacha 14 is going back to the other direction. These items, besides for reclining being a general mitzvah for the whole night, these items specifically require reclining because they are freedom items. And therefore the reclining is a detail in them. In addition to what I said before, number 7, that it's a general mitzvah for the whole night. Follow this with that.
Within the mitzvah, right?
There are 2 separate components of the mitzvah. One is a detail in the mitzvah of matzah, and one is a general thing to demonstrate freedom by reclining. And that's where they come in these 2 separate points. One, halacha 7, the general mitzvah, and halacha 14, he gets the specific items and when and why they require reclining. This is that I was understanding the flow. Clear? Good. So let's go to back to the sikha. Top page 19. Afterwards. After a number of different passages. In halacha 7, he says, the reason to recline is because you have to demonstrate your freedom tonight. And therefore, call my sahalayla. Everything you do tonight's got to be freedom, including a beautiful table, including reclining. Then afterwards, after a number of paragraphs in which he explains who should recline, how to recline, left, not right, and teacher, student, child. Yeah. Then he goes on to say which items you are required to recline at, namely wine and matzah. That was halacha number 14. That's 7 halachas later. Right? Kibatam, then Yinaseba should be your lifnezem.
Because this is what the Rebbe is showing us now.
Correct. That's right. This flow.
Explain
exactly. And why there's 2 reasons given for reclining. And halacha 7, the reason for reclining is outbirth of freedom. And halacha 14, the reason for reclining is because matzah requires you to recline because matzah is freedom. Right? Coming from different directions. So he explains, and the reason and background for why you should recline mentioned before in halacha 7. There is explained the mitzvah to recline as an independent mitzvah to demonstrate your freedom. The Khan, but here in halacha 14, his intention is to explain the second element of reclining, namely, as reclining is a detail and condition in order to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. As he concludes in halacha 14, therefore they require reclining. In halacha 7, he wasn't saying what requires reclining. He's saying everything requires reclining because you're demonstrating your freedom. And now he says, in addition to that, these specific items require you to recline. Otherwise, you don't fulfill them.
So
dependent on them. And not, that doesn't say, and therefore you have to recline at these moments. He says, and therefore they require reclining. You see, his 2 ways to rephrase it. He could have said, let's look at halacha 14 in English. Look at the Shulchan Aruch there. Yeah. Yeah. Look at halacha 14. It is necessary to recline. Yeah, when eating the olive side portion of matzah, when reciting the blessing, etc. Okay, we'll go on and describes why the 4 cups of wine are connected to freedom, right? Then he ends off. Therefore, the fekamin and karach also must be eaten while reclining. Okay, the English doesn't have the same power. Look at the Hebrew side. The fichach, therefore, translating literally, the fichach, therefore, haim, they meaning matzah and wine, tzrich and heseba require reclining. As opposed to lefichach, therefore, sarich, you are required lahasef to recline bahem while you're eating them. See the difference? Not therefore you're required to recline at these points. That would be a mitzvah to recline. When should you do it? During these mitzvahs. But no, therefore they require you to recline. Because they themselves as a mitzvah require a detail and condition that you have to recline, otherwise you won't fulfill the mitzvah. See that the English doesn't reflect that particular language, but the Hebrew has it. You see it in Hebrew?
No, where is it exactly?
Yes, and the first paragraph of halacha Yodalad. Yeah. And last line. Okay. The fichach, therefore, They require that you recline, as opposed to the fichach. Therefore, one should recline while eating them. See the language?
It's almost like tzrichim also like needs.
That's right. They need. They need the reclining. Not reclining needs them. They need the reclining. As if to say, if you don't recline, you didn't fulfill matzah. So here you see in precise language of the Alter Rebbe that in halacha zayin, he's telling us the general independent mitzvah to recline. And halacha 14 is telling you that in addition, reclining is a detail within those mitzvahs. Okay? Correct. The condition of the proper fulfillment of matzah is to recline.
You're crazy. You could eat your matzah and still not be yaitze.
That's what everything's like that. You can light your candle and it's not be yaitze your menorah.
Right.
If it's the wrong candle, it's the wrong time. If it's the wrong person, it's the wrong that. Right.
Sure. But I'm
Everything.
Shabbos, whatever.
Correct. You can put your tefillin on your arm and on your sleeve, and you weren't yaitze. Everything has conditions. Right. Every mitzvah has conditions in order to fulfill the mitzvah. Okay. Yeah, we're clear.
Yeah.
You see that perfect language. So let's look at the Sikha again. Halacha page 19 in the Sikha. Messiah in the middle of the paragraph on the top right, where there's a colon. Messiah, and as the Alter Rebbe concludes halacha 14, therefore, they require reclining, derech in a manner of freedom. Veloy, and not, therefore, you have to require while eating them. Not you have to recline while eating them, but they require reclining. Emphasis on they. The matzah is calling you to recline, not the reclining. We're calling you to do so while you're eating matzah. Yeah. So say medicine means to say shemach masatama mavur kan, following the logic expressed here in halacha 14. Hareheim, they mitzvahs elu, these mitzvahs, wine and matzah, tzrichim haseba, require reclining, as opposed to halacha 7, where there he said everything requires reclining because everything's got to be done in a freedom way. See, two halachas built separate from each other because they're coming from two different angles, both of which are true. Yeah? Clear?
Yeah.
Okay, continues the Rebbe Vatam. The reason is, as he explains in halacha 14, what's the reason why these mitzvahs require you to recline? Otherwise, these mitzvahs are compromised. The fisha called varmelu, because all of these items, the 3 matzahs and the 4 cups of wine, 3 matzahs being your mitzvah matzah, by motzi matzah, kairach, the sandwich, and afikoman, and the 4 cups of wine. Shekol dvarim elu, all of these items, heim zeicha l'gula v'lecheres, they themselves are in remembrance of redemption and freedom, and that's why they require that you recline. Hainus means to say, shetoichen and yanamhu hazeh, the inner content of these mitzvahs are zeicha l'gula v'lecheres, to remember redemption and freedom. Hu hamatzich ben chiva chiva seba. And that is what requires you to now recline derech in a manner of freedom, kitnai, as a condition to the fulfillment of they themselves, so that your remembrance of redemption and freedom when you eat matzah and wine, shalom, should be complete in all of its details. So because the matzah and wine are remembering freedom, therefore that tells you everything you do about it should be freedom manner. Recline.
Is there a question about whether matzah was a demonstration of freedom? We were discussing this.
Right, so in halacha 14, that's why he goes on to all the details and explain why the matzah is a demonstration of freedom, right? And why the sandwich also, because the sandwich is to remember the Korban Pesach, and the Korban Pesach is freedom. And the same thing with the Afikoman, it's meant to remember the Korban Pesach, and the Korban Pesach is freedom. And the 4 cups of wine are each to remember an expression of freedom, right? He goes through all the details in halacha 14. That's why he does that. That's what that was explained to us. The reason why the Alter Rebbe is going through the details, that's right. Now the Alter Rebbe is explaining it to us. The reason why the Alter Rebbe is going through the details to explain why each of these particular mitzvahs have their freedom as their inner message is to tell you that therefore, because these mitzvahs, their inner message is freedom, therefore it requires that everything you do about it should be freedom, including reclining. Yeah.
So this kind of cements the whole what we need to do and why we need to do regarding wine and matzah. But we were stuck before on karpas.
We mentioned at the beginning karpas. So the Rebbe is right.
So this
Ace
is-
Karpas, yeah, that's right.
That's what I'm kind of waiting to understand.
Okay, so we looked at the Rebbe's
It was
comment in the Haggadah, where he said there that there are those that view Karpas like Marar, and therefore no reclining, while others view Karpas the same way you would your chicken at your dinner. If you want to, you can recline. And it's and that's what the Rebbe said about deriving from the fact that the Alter Rebbe in his Seder leaves no instruction whether to recline or not recline by Karpas. The Rebbe deduced that it must be like chicken, in which you can decide if you want to recline or not. Praiseworthy too. Chabad custom not.
And certainly not in front of your master.
Sorry.
Certainly not in front of your master.
Well, that would be even during matzah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, continuing top left to page 19. And the Alter Rebbe continues to prove by highlighting the reason, right, giving us the reason for why 4 cups of wine and matzah require reclining, because the inner content of those mitzvahs are freedom, and therefore it requires that you recline. With respect to the 4 cups specifically. Quote from the Alter Rebbe in Halacha 14. The 4 cups have been established by our sages, corresponding to the 4 expressions of redemption that are mentioned in Parshas VaEira. And from this fact, that this mitzvah, wine, is all about redemption and freedom, and therefore wine has a condition that it must be drunk reclining, otherwise you don't fulfill the mitzvah. Which is not true if you were to highlight the other reasons for the 4 cups of wine. See, in here the Alter Rebbe highlights only one of the 4 reasons, which only one of the many reasons for the 4 cups of wine.
That's the only thing needed.
That's the only one required here. That's right. Exactly. For this specific mitzvah, only one of these reasons apply. There are other reasons for the 4 cups of wine. For example, quoting from the Gemara, which we will learn soon. Number 1, corresponding to the 4 cups of Pharaoh. Corresponding to 4 nations that subject the Jewish people. Corresponding to 4 cups of retribution that God will give upon those who have oppressed us. And corresponding to 4 cups that God will give the Jewish people in comfort. So there's a bunch of other symbolisms to the 4 cups, right? But none of those are mentioned here, obviously, because following any of these other reasons, following those reasons, the 4 cups are not to remember the redemption and freedom of the Jewish people, and therefore wouldn't apply here. Yeah. Okay. So this ends. There's more to the Sikha. The Rebbe gets into more of the language of the Alter Rebbe and explains, for example, why the Alter Rebbe highlights. Why does the Alter Rebbe say the 4 expressions that are in Parshas VaEira? Why not just say the 4 expressions of Gula? Why highlight that it came from Parshas VaEira? And other language nuances that the Rebbe points out in the Alter Rebbe. But this gives us the overview of the Rebbe's approach to the mitzvah of reclining, and that it has both elements. It's an independent mitzvah, as well as a detail within the mitzvahs of matzah and wine as a condition to fulfill those mitzvahs properly. It's a very beautiful thing, and you can see how every word in the Alter Rebbe is precise, and the order in the Alter Rebbe is precise, and how the Rebbe breaks it all down, and so on. Okay. God willing, tomorrow we will get back to the Gemara, where we'll learn the laws of the 4 cups of wine, and then when we're done with that Gemara, we'll go to the Shulchan Aruch, which is the second half of chapter 472, which we've been learning, which is the laws of drinking the 4 cups of wine, and then we'll get to the order of drinking 4 cups of wine, starting from the beginning of the Seder, which is Kiddush. This is where we're going. Have a wonderful day, Yidden, and we'll sort of stay with good news locally and abroad.
Amen.
Health and wealth for everyone. Safety.
Amen.